morning to all of you. Today Dr. Vijay Raj Singh, as a coordinator of Science Lecture Series 2, takes this opportunity to welcome you all to the webinar by the Department of Physics at Central University of South Bihar, Gaya. Honorable Speaker, Professor Sajjad Athar, respected Head of Department of Physics, and my dear friends, I extend a warm welcome to all of you and participants for this webinar today. We all have gathered here for a webinar on a very interesting topic, that is chemistry's periodic table through the eyes of physicists. I am sure you all that you will truly enjoy this session and will definitely take some learnings at home today. I request to Professor Venkatesh Singh to introduce our esteemed guest of today's webinar and request him to present his talk. Professor Venkatesh Singh.
So, hello everyone. Namaste and very good morning. This is Venkatesh of Central University of South Bihar, Gaya. Today I welcome all of you on behalf of the organizing team of this virtual science lecture series, which is organized by the Department of Physics, the School of Physical and Chemical Sciences, Central University of South Bihar, Gaya. I would like to thank all the online participants for showing their interest and taking part in the season 2, 5th lecture of the science lecture series. Today, we have the pleasure of having one of the renowned scientists, very dynamic researcher, very popular teacher, and my dear friend, Professor Sajjad Athar ji, from Department of Physics, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh, with us. I welcome you, Professor Sajjad ji, from the bottom of my heart. Professor Sajjad Athar will speak on the periodic table through the eyes of the physicist. Dr. Sajjad Athar is a professor of physics since 2010 and member of various international advisory committees. Professor Sajjad ji completed his PhD degree from Aligarh Muslim University in 1997. He earned gold medal in masters. Professor Athar is leading expert in neutrino cross-section calculation. He has wide network of international research collaboration, and he is one of the top 25th neutrino scientists in the world. Professor Sajjad ji has recently authored one textbook published by a renowned international publisher, the Cambridge University Press, on the physics of neutrino interaction. Professor Sajjad Athar is well-traveled and well-known figure in his area of research. This popular lecture will shed new insight on the periodic table. This lecture will be a beautiful blend of basic, popular, and advanced knowledge of physics and chemistry, and I believe would equally draw huge attention of the knowledge-loving undergraduate and postgraduate physics students, as well as young and dynamic faculties. As I have always mentioned before each lecture, that our speakers are internationally renowned and real gems of their area. Therefore, they do not need detailed introduction. However, for the curious young and motivated participant, we have already uploaded his very short CV on the Science Lecture Series website and Facebook. Dear participants, colleagues, and friends, if you have any query and questions related to this lecture, please write down in the chat box. At the end of this lecture, Secretary of the Science Lecture Series, Dr. Puneet Misra ji will ask your question on your behalf. Once again, I welcome you, Professor Sajjad Athar, and we are really grateful to you for accepting our request of delivering today's lecture, sharing knowledge and time with us for your busy schedule. With these few words, I would like to request Professor Sajjad Athar ji to please deliver his talk on the periodic table through the eyes of the physicist. Professor Sajjad ji, please deliver your lecture.
Thank you very much for the kind words, Venkatesh Saab. And it's a great pleasure talking to you all through webinar in these difficult and testing times. At the outset, let me tell you that the talk may be a bit lengthier, and I am very sorry in advance, but at the end, there will be some takeaway for each one of you. That much I can assure. Now, why the topic, the periodic table through the eyes of a physicist? This is because in all the chemistry courses, we have heard a lot about the periodic table and the 118 elements of chemistry. Majority of them are naturally occurring elements, but we don't know about their origin. Today, we are going to explore them. For example, the molecular formula of water is H2O, and the water all around the universe, the hydrogen in that means the hydrogen atoms in water were produced almost 14 billion years ago during the Big Bang. Therefore, the water which we are drinking is really the relic of the Big Bang. Similarly, the carbon, oxygen, calcium, iron, etc. were produced, or rather being produced, in stellar nucleosynthesis. Heavy elements, heavier than iron, like gold, lead, uranium, thorium, whatever you talk about, they were produced during the death phase of a star. Therefore, except for a few transuranic elements, most of the elements had origin in astrophysics. And that is why I have chosen a topic of astrophysics. And during the course of lecture, we will see that how these elements have been formed. And during the course of lecture, I will talk about Big Bang, interstellar matter, the matter that exists between the stars, then how a star's birth takes place, how a stars die. And then during the phase from formation to death, a star goes through various phases like red giant, super red giant, white dwarf, neutron star, and black hole. And during these phases, the different elements get formed. And that is why the understanding of these phases are quite important to us. And there are certain building blocks of my lecture. First, I am going to introduce elementary particles. What are the elementary particles? Then I will introduce in a few minutes I will spend a few minutes on neutrinos. Then I will talk about sun. And finally, I will come to the topic of today's lecture, how the different elements get formed. As you can see in this periodic table, that the different regions have been shown by different color shades like blue, green, etc. And they basically shows us the origin of these elements like Big Bang fusion, merging neutron stars, dying low mass stars, cosmic ray fusion, etc. Now, to a chemist, everything that we see around us is made up of only three particles: protons, neutrons, and electrons. But to a physicist, this is not the end of a story, because history has reminded us that initially people thought that molecules are the fundamental objects, but people observed molecular spectroscopy, they observed molecular transitions, and from there it was inferred that no, this molecule is not a fundamental object, because some transition is taking place, some sub-objects exist, and that is why you are getting these spectra. Then people thought about atom to be a fundamental building block. Then people observed atomic spectral lines like in hydrogen atom, Lehman, Barmer, Paschen series, etc. And those imply that really atom is not a fundamental building block. Then it was found that atom is made up of a nucleus and electrons revolve around that. Then people also observed the phenomena of radioactivity, and where alpha particles get emitted or beta particles get emitted or energy gets out from the nucleus. Therefore, this nucleus can also not be a single entity. There are some structure, those exist inside the nucleus, and that is why you talk about the nuclear spectroscopy. Then people found that really these nucleus, this is made up of protons and neutrons. Initially, it was thought that these protons and neutrons, they are fundamental objects. But later it was found that these protons and neutrons, they have got also a structure, because you can excite a proton and you have anomalous magnetic moment, which is different from the normal magnetic moment of these protons and neutrons, which imply that there exists some substructure inside this proton and neutron. And that is what we call by the name today as quarks. Therefore, these protons and neutrons, they are made up of quarks. Therefore, today, electrons, we call them to be elementary particle, because whatever energy we assign to them, we give to them, that is taken as the kinetic energy. Therefore, today, if you look at the standard model of particle physics, then you have some fundamental particles, and those fundamental particles are quarks and leptons. There are 6 quarks, up, down, charm, strange, top and bottom, and then the leptons, electrons, muons and tauons, and associated with each type of lepton, like electron, there is a neutrino associated with it. For muon, there is a muon neutrino associated with it. And for a tauon, there is a tauon neutrino associated with it. And then there are antiparticles corresponding to each one of them. Like for U bar, for electron, the antiparticle that we know by the name positron, and for neutrino, we know by the name antineutrino. Therefore, these neutrinos, these are the fundamental particles. Presently, they don't have any structure and their masses are terribly small. But you will be surprised to know that in the last 60-50 years in physics, almost 10 Nobel Prizes have been awarded, either directly to the discoveries of or experiment associated with neutrinos, or the places where neutrinos have played a very important role. The important point is why the neutrino physics has been given so much emphasis and why the progress is slow. The answer to that is neutrinos are weakly interacting particles. What do I mean by weakly interacting? This you can understand by taking the simple example. Suppose I have got a target particle here and I have a single photon. Now, if I say that this photon, I am 100% sure that this is going to strike this target particle, then if you want to do or repeat this experiment with a neutrino, then either instead of a single particle, I need 100 million particles, or if I don't have a choice, I have only the choice that there will be a single target particle and single neutrino, then I will have to try 100 million times to have the scattering. And that is why neutrino experiments are quite difficult, but neutrinos are the most abundant particles after the photons. Their number density, for example, in the case of photon, the number density is 450 per centimeter cube, while for neutrinos, this is 330 centimeter cube. But what I have told you, that they have played a very important role. If there are no neutrinos, then there cannot be any shine in the stars. And that means no energy from the sun to keep us warm. No elements heavier than hydrogen and helium. And that for that matter, no carbon, no oxygen, no water. That means no earth, no moon, and no life. And that is why the study of neutrinos are very important. The most important point is, throughout the day, round the clock, almost trillions of neutrinos passes through our body. The sources of these neutrinos are sun, the core of the earth, the atmosphere of the earth, then nuclear power plants, then extragalactic sources, and all that. And they are constantly passing through our body and we don't realize them. Besides that, our body also contains an isotope of potassium, which releases almost 340 million neutrinos per day from our body. And for example, if you talk about tomato, dates, banana, all have these isotopes of potassium 40, and they are the source of neutrinos. For example, a single banana emits 1 million neutrinos per day. And then looking at them, you can realize that really this is an important particle which should be studied. However, the progress, because of its weak interaction nature, is very slow. Now let me come to the other building block of my lecture, and that is the sun. And I will discuss a few properties associated with the sun. As we know that the sun is the nearest star to us, and its mass is around 10 power 30 kilogram, and its density is 150 gram per centimeter cube. Then we divide sun into the different layers. First, we have the core of the sun, where the nuclear fusion reaction is going on. Then there are different atmosphere of the sun, like we have the atmosphere of the earth. Here also we have the atmosphere of the sun, which we call as by the name photosphere, chromosphere, and corona. All the day the sun that we see is basically nothing but a photosphere. The temperature of the core we know is around 15 million degree Kelvin, while the temperature of the photosphere is around 6,000 degree Kelvin. Now, what we know about a star, that the star shines due to the nuclear fusion reaction going on inside the core. And the fundamental reaction that is taking place is through the hydrogen burning. We say that, say, 4 hydrogen nuclei, they are burning to give us a helium nucleus. Besides that, 2 positrons get emitted, 2 neutrinos get emitted, and 24.73 MeV of energy or radiations, they get emitted in a 4 proton burning. And as you can see, neutrinos are there, and this is an important component. If it is not there, this reaction is not possible. And this positron being antiparticle, and we have inside the sun only matter, therefore it gets immediately annihilated, and it gives rise to another 2 MeV of energy. Therefore, if we talk about 4 proton burning, but this 4 proton burning is not a single step process. Basically, this is a many step process. For example, we consider 2 protons. When they fuse, they give rise to a deuterium nucleus. Then a positron gets emitted and a neutrino gets emitted. One fellow from here and one fellow from here. And then another proton gets fused with this deuterium nucleus to give rise a helium nucleus. Similarly, you have another 2 protons and you have a helium nucleus here. Therefore, these 2 then fuse to give rise to a helium nuclei, and finally 2 protons also get emitted. But as you can see, we are consuming initially 4 protons plus 2 protons. That means in total 6 protons we are consuming, 2 protons we are getting back. And that is why in principle we say that instead of 6 protons getting consumed, we are basically consuming 4 protons, and this is giving rise to a helium nuclei, and then these two positrons, which I have shown here, the two neutrinos, which I have shown here, and these radiations which come out from here. Therefore, the basic process is this, where 4 proton burning is taking place, and energy radiations are coming out. But we know that these radiations, they will interact with matter through electromagnetic interaction, and therefore, for a photon to come out of the nucleus, it takes almost 200,000 years. Therefore, whatever luminosity of the sun we are seeing today, those have been there because of the photons which were produced 200,000 years ago. While the neutrinos, which are weakly interacting particles, they don't interact or hardly interact inside the sun, and they come out immediately. And if you know the Earth-Sun distance, which we call by the name 1 astronomical unit, they take only 2 seconds of time to come out of this sun, while the photons take 200,000 years. Therefore, to know about the immediate happening around the sun, neutrino is the best source. And why to the students, since I came to know that there will be graduate students also, besides the postgraduate students, I am showing a simple example. I am so sorry for the experts sitting in the audience, that why the energy get released in the nuclear fusion reaction. This can be understood by looking at this simple picture, where I have plotted mass per nucleon on the y-axis and atomic number of the nuclei on the x-axis. As you can see, that when you fuse 2 lighter nuclei, you will come down the ladder, and that means the mass per nucleon will decrease. And this difference of mass, this comes out as the form of energy. As you can see, individually, the mass of 2 protons and 2 neutrons, they are greater than the mass of the helium nuclei. And this difference in mass, this gives rise to energy. And this fusion reaction can go on up to an isotope of iron, which has got least mass per nucleon. Therefore, you can have fusion of all nuclei before the isotope of iron. Similarly, if we talk about a fission of a nucleus, then what happens in a fission? A heavier nuclei breaks into 2 lighter nuclei, and the mass per nucleon in this heavier nuclei is more than the mass per nucleon in the case of a lighter nuclei, and which I have shown it here, that the mass per nucleon in the lighter nuclei plus the neutrons which have got emitted, they are different from the mass here. This is heavier, and this difference in mass, this comes out in the form of energy. Therefore, you can have fission of heavier nuclei, you cannot have fusion of heavier nuclei, because mass per nucleon will increase, and you cannot have the energy violation. The other important point while we talk about the sun is that the temperature of the core of the sun is 15 million degree Kelvin. And we talk about the fusion of 2 protons inside the core of the sun. We know that from electromagnetic interaction that these 2 protons are the positively charged particles. And if they are positively charged particles, there should be repulsion. And this, the 9th class mathematics or physics, this is given in terms of the Coulomb energy. Therefore, if you have this amount of Coulomb energy and you want to overcome the Coulomb repulsion, where the size of the typical proton is 10 power minus 15 meters, then you need a temperature of 10 billion degree Kelvin. You see, you need a temperature of 10 billion degree Kelvin, while the temperature inside the core of the sun is 15 million degree Kelvin. Now, how is that the temperature inside the core is small or lesser than the required temperature, but still nuclear fusion reaction is going on? The answer to that is does not come from the classical mechanics. This comes from quantum mechanics. And to the students, again, a basic concept. What is quantum mechanical tunneling? Suppose I have got a huge wall, and if I ask a car racer to cross this high barrier, then what will happen? He will never be able to cross this high barrier. But if the barrier height is small, and I have got many cars, and all of them are trying, then there exists a finite probability of at least a car crossing this barrier. Now, if I am going to reduce this barrier height further, then there exist more chances of crossing car through this barrier. The same analogy happens here also. Or the second example that you can take, suppose I have a frog in an infinite well. Then if I ask the question, what is the probability of frog to come out? The answer to that is probability is almost zero. But if the well is finite, a large bucket, and if I ask the question that what is the probability, then your answer will be the probability is really finite, that there exists a chance that the frog will come out. Now, if there are many frogs in the well, then at least if all of them are trying, then at least there exists a chance that one of the frog will come out of the well. The same happens with the protons inside the core of the sun. Remember, I have told you the mass of the proton, a mass of the sun is 10 power 30 kilogram. And 1 kilogram has 10 power 26 atoms. Therefore, in total, if you say that there are around 10 power 57 protons, and among them, to have this luminosity, you have to fuse only 10 power 38 protons. This is a scenario which is something like in the bottom well, which I have shown, that there are umpteen number of protons, and a few of them have to be successful to give rise to the present luminosity of the sun. Now, after looking this figure of 10 power 57 and 38, you will get surprised that how it's possible. Now you can look at this example, a simple example. Suppose I have got $1 million. Now $1 million is 10 power 36. And I have given $1,000 to my friend. Then $1,000 in the powers of 10 power 3 will be written like this. Now, what is 10 power 6 minus 10 power 3? This is, my dear, this is not 10 power 3, but this is 9,99,000. That means still we have sufficient amount left with me. Therefore, in general, when I am talking about 10 power 57 protons inside the core of the sun and 10 power 38 protons, they are participating at per second to get fused, then you can really see that the amount which is waning away is really not large, it is small. And that is why through this picture, you can calculate the lifetime of the sun. As you can see, the luminosity of the sun is 24 into 10 power 38 million electron volts. And in 4 proton bonding, we are getting an energy of 24.7. We have the mass of the sun. Then the lifetime of the sun you can calculate by just this number, total number of protons in the sun upon the protons burning per second in the sun. 10 power 57 upon 10 power 38. If you look at this number, this will turn out to be 9 billion years. That is what we call to be the lifetime of the sun. Now, these were the building blocks of my lecture. Now, let me come to the formation of various elements in the sun, and these processes which we call by the name nucleosynthesis. There are 3 broad processes: Big Bang nucleosynthesis, stellar nucleosynthesis, and supernova nucleosynthesis. In the Big Bang nucleosynthesis, hydrogen, helium, and traces of lithium came into existence. In the case of supernova nucleosynthesis, heavier elements, heavier than iron, came into existence. In the case of stellar nucleosynthesis, elements from carbon up to iron, they came into existence. Here, I won't be talking about beryllium, boron, and the major portion of lithium, because they were not produced in these nucleosynthesis processes, but their origin are also due to the processes, the high amount of energy which are released during a supernova explosion. When they come out into space, they strike the heavier elements and give rise to these lighter elements. And these borons are also found in nature. Without borons, we cannot think of trees. Now let me start with the Big Bang theory. What we know about this Big Bang, that the Big Bang theory is a cosmological model which describes how the universe expanded from an initial state almost 14 billion years ago, starting with extremely high density and extremely high temperature. The temperature was more than 10^35 degree Kelvin. It was Lemaitre who in 1927, after getting inspired by Einstein's general theory of relativity, gave the idea of expanding universe and argued that the universe could be traced back in time to an originating single point, which he called primeval atom or pyramidal atom. This idea of Lemaitre got the support of Hubble, who confirmed that the galaxies are going far away from each other. That is, in technical terms, what we call by the name galactic redshifts. Major boost to this Big Bang theory came with the observation of microwave background radiation by Penzias and Wilson in 1964. From these observations, we came to know that the average temperature of the present universe is around 2.7 degree Kelvin. Therefore, what we know is that at the initial stage, at the point of singularity, where the volume was almost zero, the density was infinite, all of the matter energy was compressed into an infinitely small point, and then the explosion took place. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of the Big Bang theory, but I am going to tell you the important periods where the matter formation took place. For example, between the time picoseconds to microseconds, quarks, antiquarks, electrons, positrons, neutrinos, and antineutrinos with masses came into existence. This was the time when the temperature was below than 10^50 degree Kelvin. Then quarks and antiquarks got annihilated. But we are living in a matter-dominated universe through the process which we call by the name baryogenesis. And we say that we have a surplus of quarks than the antiquarks. Then between the time microsecond to 1 second, quarks combine to form hadrons like protons and neutrons when the temperature was below 10^13 degree Kelvin, and the electrons fuse with protons to form neutrons and gave off neutrinos, which continues to travel freely through space today. Some neutrons and neutrinos recombined into new proton-electron pairs, and the density at the end of this time was around 10^11 gram per centimeter cube, while today the density is 10^-29 gram per centimeter cube. You can look at this. At this time, the density was very, very large in comparison to the density in which we are living. Now, during the time 1 second to 3 minutes, leptons, antileptons dominated the mass of the universe. As electrons and positrons got, being the particle and antiparticle, got annihilated, energy in the form of photons freed up, and colliding photons, again, they were energetic enough to give rise to electron-positron pairs. Then the nucleosynthesis took place from 3 minutes to 20 minutes after the Big Bang. The temperature of the universe fell to 1,000,000,000 degree Kelvin. Atomic nuclei began to form through nuclear fusion. Simple elements like hydrogen, helium, and traces of lithium were formed. Mind it, this we are talking only about nuclei, not atom. After about 20 minutes, nuclear fusion stopped as the temperature and the universe and the density fell. Therefore, broadly, the Big Bang nucleosynthesis, we put it by such ladder diagrams where we have proton, neutron, they gave rise to deuterium nucleus. And then through this, again, proton capture, we had the helium nuclei, and the helium nuclei with the neutron capture, they gave rise to tritium nuclei, helium, and these lithium. Therefore, you can see we have the helium nuclei and the lithium nuclei, which were formed during the Big Bang nucleosynthesis. But these are only the traces of lithium. Now, major portion of lithium came through the spallation of heavier nuclei into lighter nuclei during the death phase of a star. Now, between 20 minutes to 240,000 years, the energy of the universe was dominated by photons, and the universe was filled with plasma, a hot, opaque soup of atomic nuclei and electrons. Between 240,000 years to 300,000 years, the temperature fell to 3,000 degree Kelvin. Density continued to fall. Hydrogen and helium nuclei captured the electrons to form atoms. By the end of this period, the universe consisted of a fog of about 75% hydrogen and 25% helium, with just traces of lithium. Now I'm going to talk about interstellar matter. This interstellar matter is a very important component. Without this, we cannot think of the formation of stars. This basically interstellar matter is the matter those exist between the two stars, because from the naked eye, if you look at the sky, then what we find that there are stars and there are empty places. But the places are not empty, they are filled with interstellar matter. And why we are unable to realize the existence of interstellar matter, I'm going to give you, demonstrate it by giving this example. The density of interstellar matter is 10,000 times less than the density of vacuum that we can create in our labs using the most efficient vacuum pumps even today. The best achieved vacuum in the laboratory is around 10⁻⁻20 gram per centimeter cube, while the density of these interstellar gas particles, they are basically 10⁻⁻24 gram per centimeter cube. Now, just for comparison, I have shown that the density of air is 10⁻⁻3 gram per centimeter cube, and density of water is 1 gram per centimeter cube. In terms of atoms, you can realize this. 1 gram has 10⁻23 atoms. Therefore, if I am talking about a density where it is 10⁻⁻24 gram per centimeter cube, that means not more than 1 atom per centimeter cube. While if you look at the density of air, which is 10⁻⁻3 gram per centimeter cube, you have 10⁻20 atoms per centimeter cube. Therefore, you can realize that really these interstellar matter, they are filled with particles, mainly more than 70 to 75% are hydrogen, then 10 to 15% are helium, and very little traces of lithium. These are the constituents of interstellar matter. However, the distribution of this interstellar matter in space is not uniform. And there are places where the density of interstellar matter is quite large. And these places where the density of the interstellar matter is quite large, we call them by the name nebula. And I have given a few examples just for the comparison's sake. The size of observable universe today is 10 power 27, approximately 10 power 27 meters. While you know the size of the Earth's diameter is radius is 6,400 kilometers. Therefore, it will turn out to be around 10 power 7 meters. Size of Milky Way, the galaxy in which we are living, is 10 power 20 meters. And size of these nebula, which are found in the galactic planes, typically their sizes vary from 1 astronomical unit to 10 power 10,000 astronomical unit. That means 10 power 1 astronomical unit is 10 power 11 meters. Now, if you translate this diameter of Earth in terms of astronomical unit, it will turn out to be 0.000085 astronomical unit. Therefore, you can realize that still you are talking about places inside the interstellar matter which are denser, but you can realize the size by comparing with the size of the Earth. And the density of these clouds, they are larger than the average density. The average density is 10 power minus 24 gram per centimeter cube for the interstellar matter, while these densities are 10 power minus 19 to 10 power minus 21 gram per centimeter cube. And the masses of these clouds, they are quite heavy. They are almost million times the mass of the sun. These are the relatively cooler places. The temperature are around 10 to 30 degree Kelvin, and the densities are 10 power minus 19 to 10 power minus 21 gram per centimeter cube. But see, the size is quite humongous. In this humongous size, the distribution of matter of hydrogen and helium, they are not uniform. There are places where the density becomes 100 to 1,000 times more than the average density of the nebula, and these places are known as globules. These are basically said to be the progenitors of stars. These globules are believed to be the progenitors of stars, and I'm going to spend a minute on this. Therefore, this is the typical globule, which is quite dense. I'm going to tell you how do stars form, and this is an important concept, and I'm taking a simple example. Suppose I'm talking about distribution of gaseous particles. The distribution is uniform, interstellar matter. Now, suppose some disturbance takes place. Some perturbation is taking place. What this disturbance will do? This disturbance will redistribute these gaseous atoms. Now, the important point is, if the gaseous pressure is sufficient enough to fight this perturbation, then after some time, they will come back to their original position. But if the perturbation, if the disturbance dominates, then at some place, there will be more molecules, and other places, the number of molecules will become smaller. Therefore, one place, say here, this will become denser, and these will be the lighter places. You can understand it by a simple example. Suppose there is a castle, and some external agency have attacked on this castle. Now, the army of the castle, which are there in the castle, there are two possibilities. Either they will fight back with these external people, or these external people will dominate over them. Now, if they fight back, then they will go back. Therefore, the perturbation will die away. But if these people are strong enough to conquer this castle, then they are going to rule here. The same thing happens during the formation of a star. If the perturbation dies away, then after some time, the gaseous particles come back to their original position. But if the perturbation dominates, then at some place, the molecule density becomes very large. And from Newton's law of gravitation, we know that if this space has become massive, then because of Newton's law of gravitation, it will start inviting the other lighter particles towards it because of gravitational interaction. And these lighter particles will come with certain kinetic energy, and it will strike this, and this kinetic energy will be dumped as a thermal energy. This is where the birth of a star or progenitor of a star starts taking place. That perturbation exists, and this perturbation leads to the increase in the density at some place. And since this place has become massive, therefore it will start inviting the molecules towards it, and gradually the temperature of this zone increases. Now the question arises, what could be the cause of those perturbations? From where those perturbations comes? The answer to that is, presently there are three theories which says that this could be the cause of perturbation. One is that there exist tremendous shock waves that move around the entire galaxies, and these waves are known as intergalactic waves, and their sources are not yet known. Then during the formation of a star releases huge amount of energy, and this energy moves in a space. They could be cause of perturbation. Or during the death phase of a star releases huge amount of, colossal amount of energy with the speed of 50,000 kilometers per second. They could be the cause of perturbation. But still, this is a topic of research, and people are working on that. What could be the cause of the initial shock waves? Therefore, when we talk about the birth of a star, the important point is the place where the density has become large, they start collapsing because of the gravitational pull, and the temperature of this region starts increasing. Now, if the temperature is increasing, the radiations will go out. Therefore, a protostellar cloud will continue to collapse as long as the gravitational binding energy can be eliminated. This excess energy is primarily lost through radiation. However, the collapsing cloud will eventually become opaque to its own radiation. Slowly, that means the radiation will unable to come out. Slowly, the temperature of this region will start piling up and it takes millions of years to reach a temperature where the nuclear fusion reaction may start taking place. For example, in the case of the core of the sun, it is 15 million degree Kelvin. It has not reached in one day. It has taken millions of years. Therefore, when this phase comes, when the nuclear fusion starts, hydrogen burning starts, we say that the star has come onto the main sequence. Therefore, basically what is this? This is a balance between the gravitational pressure, or you can say the gas pressure which is collapsing, and the radiation pressure which is coming out from the core. And this defines the envelope of a star, and basically this is a balance between the fusion energy which is arising due to the fusion of protons inside the core, and the gravitational pressure or gas pressure, which is where the gas particles are coming towards each other. This balance leads to the development of a main sequence star. Therefore, when this envelope gets well defined and proton fusion starts taking place, we say that stars has come into this main sequence. Therefore, this main sequence can last from 10 of million years to tens of billion years. For example, in the case of sun, our sun is a dull star. It is a G2 type star where the surface temperature is 6000 Kelvin. It will last for, it has already spent 4.5 billion years of time. It will last for another 4.5 billion years. That means its lifetime is typically 9 billion years. But there are stars whose lifetime is quite large. They are light stars. But there are stars whose lifetime is much smaller than the lifetime of the sun. For example, if the star is 50 times more massive than the sun, then this span will be only 4 million years. Sun is spending 10 billion years almost. But if the mass of a star is 50 times the mass of the sun, then it will spend only 4 million years of time in the main sequence. Therefore, in the main sequence, hydrogen burning is taking place, helium is getting formed in the core, and we are getting or receiving energy. Our sun will remain on this main sequence for another 4.5 billion years. Now, what will happen when the hydrogen will get exhausted? Okay. Now, when the hydrogen will get exhausted, we know that now we have helium inside the core. But what is helium? Helium has got 2 protons. Now, if you have to fuse helium nuclei to form a carbon nucleus, you need high amount of energy to overcome the Coulomb barrier. Therefore, what happens? Again, the gravitational collapse starts taking place because the radiation pressure is not sufficient enough to counter this gravitational pressure or gas pressure. Therefore, slowly and slowly, the temperature inside the core of this star starts piling up, and it takes millions of years for a star to have sufficient temperature. Say, for example, for helium nuclei, we need around 100 million Kelvin of temperature for the helium fusion to start. Therefore, when the radiations are coming out from the core, when the gas pressure is collapsing, then these radiation again, they expand the outer envelope of the star. Therefore, when the helium fusion starts, large amount of energy starts coming out, and this expands the envelope of the star, and the star becomes a red giant star. Now, when our sun will become a red giant star, it will envelop even our Earth. Therefore, if the sun will become a red giant star, there will be no life, because the sun is going to envelop us where the temperature will be very, very high. Now, this will happen to sun or the sun-like stars, but for massive stars, the story is different. Therefore, what happens when you have the helium burning, you have a carbon core, and then all the matter have not got exhausted. You have, besides that, the temperature is sufficient enough for the helium burning, and then outside that, the temperature is sufficient enough for the hydrogen burning. Therefore, you have the different layers where helium burning is taking place and forming carbon, and hydrogen burning is taking place, forming helium, and so on. And since many reactions are taking place simultaneously, therefore, the lifespan of such red giant stars, they are much smaller than the main sequence stars. And these are the places where you have the formation of carbon and oxygen inside the core of a star. Therefore, if you talk about carbon and oxygen in stars like sun, this is the reaction which is happening. Now, what happens when a red giant runs low on its fuel? That means when helium is getting exhausted, then what happens? Now you see, when helium is getting exhausted, then again there will be imbalance, and radiation pressure will not be sufficient enough to counter the gas pressure. But the mass of the core is not sufficient enough to start carbon fusion. Therefore, what happens when the gas is shrinking, the core is shrinking, and the radiations are becoming enormous, the core begins to shrink again and heats up quickly. The energy released by these heating causes the outer portion of the star to be blown outwards at a speed almost with 20 to 30 kilometers per second. Although this material cools down, the core left behind is extremely hot, almost a temperature of 100,000 Kelvin. An object we know that at very high temperature emits large amount of ultraviolet radiation. This ultraviolet radiation emitted by the hot core of the star causes the escaping part of the former red giant to glow as it blows away. Such a glowing object is known as planetary nebula. Mind it, I'm talking about a name, planetary nebula, but mind it, it has nothing to do with a planet. It has nothing to do with a nebula. Because of some spherical shape, we are calling it by the name planetary. And since it contains matter, and those matters may be the cause of the formation of next star, or maybe the cause of the elements which we find in the universe. That is why we call it by the name planetary nebula. Now, I have shown here a picture of a white dwarf in behind and a planetary nebula surrounding it. I'm showing you through a picture which you can appreciate that how a planetary nebula gets formed. See here, the radiations from the core, they are coming out in the huge amount, and they are blowing the outer atmosphere of the star, and the outer atmosphere of the star gets expelled up, and you are left with a bright spot which you will find just in a few seconds here, which is nothing but a white dwarf. And the expelled part of the star that you will see just now, that is nothing but a planetary nebula. Why it is bright? This is very bright because behind that you have a white dwarf which is presently very luminous, but as the time goes by, its radiation will become smaller and smaller. Therefore, the energy those will come out from here will get smaller and smaller, and slowly these you will find a fainted or a faint place nearby it. Therefore, this is how a planetary nebula gets formed, and this is the reason of many light elements being expelled by the star in a explosion. Now, our sun, we know that it is a lonely star. There is no nearby star. The other star is quite distant. But there are millions of stars which are binary stars, where two stars are close by. And there are places where there is a red giant star, and nearby to this is a white dwarf star. And this is what is an important concept, and this leads to type 1a supernova explosion. You see, this is a red giant star. This is a white dwarf star. Okay, the size of white dwarf is quite small, say of the size of the Earth, and while the size of the red giant is quite humongous. Now, what it does? See, this is a red giant star which has got a core, and the envelope has become very large. Now, since the envelope is very large, therefore the gravitational pull of this core with this outer part is not strong. While if a white dwarf is close by, the gravitational pull of this white dwarf will be much larger for the outer part of this red giant star. See, red giant star has lot of matter around it. This white dwarf has lot of matter around it. And then what is happening? This white dwarf star is attracting the peripheral region of the red giant star. And you see an interesting thing happens. This is a white dwarf. This is a red giant star. And this constitutes a binary stars, and then you see a very beautiful picture. This is what it is. This white dwarf is doing. This is siphoning of matter from the red giant. And what happens gradually when it siphons of matter, huge, slowly the mass of this part becomes much larger than the mass of this part, and therefore huge amount of matter gets chunked away from this red giant star towards this. And during this phase, colossal amount of energy get released in the space. The elements get scattered into the space and they spread all across during this type 1 supernovae. Then let me come to the heavier mass stars. I am talking about the heavier stars. Heavier than that, that means those stars whose masses are more than 8 times mass of the sun. And as I have told you, there are millions and millions of stars which are much heavier than 10 masses of the sun. These stars, they can have two different phases. Either they can die as a neutron star or they can die as a black hole. We have discussed already about the red giant, planetary nebula, and white dwarf, but now I am talking about the super red giant and supernova explosion, and where we can have neutron star or we can have black hole. Now, if your star is massive, then see, in the case of sun, we have only talked about helium fusion because the mass inside the core was not sufficient enough. The temperature was not sufficient enough to ignite carbon fusion. But if the mass of a core of a star becomes heavier, then you can have carbon fusion. If the mass of a star, another star is much heavier, then you can have oxygen fusion to silicon. And if you have further star, then you can have silicon fusion also up to iron. But since the temperature gradually of the core becomes so high that this reaction takes place very fast. As you can see, the lifespan of sun is 10 billion years on main sequence. But when we talk about heavier stars, this lifespan decreases. It is million years on main sequence, then 600 years for carbon to oxygen. Then it takes only 1 day for silicon to iron, and then core collapses in fraction of a second. Therefore, in heavier stars, you will find multi-layered onion-like structure. This structure exists for stars having 25 times more mass than the sun. But if you talk about less massive stars, then you will have silicon in the core and oxygen, carbon, helium, and hydrogen. If you have lesser massive, then you have carbon in the core and so on. Therefore, this is how the different elements get produced inside the core of the sun. Now, what happens if you are talking about a massive star which has iron in the core? We have seen a picture where mass per nucleon of iron is least. And when the mass per nucleon of iron is least, you cannot have fusion or you cannot have fission. Therefore, what happens? Again, there is a gravitational instability. What happens? There is no fresh source of nuclear fusion inside the core, but the radiation pressure now is not able to sustain the gas pressure of the outside core or the outside envelope of the star. They start falling and falling inside or towards the core. And when they are coming inside and towards the core, the radiation, the temperature inside that envelope starts increasing. And this leads to the photo disintegration of iron. And such process where helium nuclei and neutrons, they start getting produced. And not only that, when the core is collapsing, So the iron core continues to be subjected to gravity, which pushes the electrons closer to the nuclei. Then the quantum limit allows, and they disappear by combining with protons to give rise to neutrons and neutrinos. Similarly, electrons combined with nuclei to give rise to another nuclei and neutrinos. Now, their density is large enough that radiations are not escaping, but neutrinos are weakly interacting particles. Neutrinos initially, they start coming out of the star. But gradually, since the star is still collapsing and collapsing, the density is increasing and increasing. A time comes when even the neutrinos are unable to come out of the shell of the core. They get trapped inside the core of the star. And a time comes when the core reaches to the nuclear density. The density of the core becomes enormously large that further you cannot shrink the core. But still what is happening, the outer part of the core, this is still shrinking, but the core has become stiff. Therefore, what happens? It is something like if you go to the seas, there are sea waves, and sea waves strike the shores. When they strike the shore, they produce lots of noises, lots of sound energy gets released. Similarly, here also, the core has become stiff. The inner core is stiff. It has reached nuclear density. It cannot further shrink, but outer part is still coming towards it. Therefore, it bounces back the inner shell of the core. When it bounces back, lots of energy gets released. Now, this phenomena comes to large mass stars when their energy is sufficient enough to blow the outer portion of the core as well as to blow the complete star. And this is what we call by the name supernova explosion. Therefore, what happens? Once this process starts, in a fraction of a second, an iron core the size of the Earth and with a mass like our sun collapses into a ball of neutrons a few kilometers across. This gravitational collapse releases an enormous amount of energy, more than, mind it, more than 100 times what our sun will radiate over its complete lifetime. Over the complete 10 billion years, the amount of radiation that will be released, this explosion will release 100 times more than this amount of energy. And as I have told you, this takes place a small amount of time, a fraction of time. Imagine something 1 million times the mass of Earth collapsing in 15 seconds. The collapse happens so quickly that it creates enormous shock waves that cause the outer part of the star to explode. The explosion sends the shock waves of the stars that zooms across the universe with a speed almost up to the speed of 50,000 kilometers per hour, for 10,000 kilometers or 5,000 kilometers per second. This energy blows the outer layers of the star off into space in a giant explosion that is known as supernova explosion. The core of the neutrons left behind is called a neutron star and is incredibly dense. It is very dense. For example, if you put a matter of neutron star on a spoon, it will weigh a ton. In some cases, the remaining mass is large enough that gravity continues to collapse the core until it becomes a black hole. Now, the important point is the creation of free neutrons by electron capture during the rapid collapse to high density of a supernova core, along with quick assembly of neutron-rich seed nuclei, makes or leads to a process. That process we call by the name rapid process or R process. This is a technical term, rapid process, and the other technical term which I will call it as slow process or S process. This R process is said to be the reason of the formation of heavier elements, elements heavier than iron. And you know, the seed nuclei is basically these neutrons. Therefore, the neutrons play a very important role in the formation of these heavier elements. This is typical. I have shown the supernova explosion. Now I am showing you what is happening during the R process or in a neutrino-driven wind. You see if you see a wind in your city and the wind is very strong, then what it does, the wind takes away along with it leaves, papers, sometimes even small jhopri type of things. That is also taken away by a strong wind. Similarly, here also, when when the matter of a star is blowing away with a speed of 10,000 kilometers per second, it starts taking away these nuclei which were being formed during the stellar synthesis. And on way you have neutrons and nuclei. These neutrons play the role of, or the key role for the formation of heavier nuclei. Therefore, what happens when huge amount of energy, basically those energy get carried away by the neutrinos, they come out with a very huge amount of energy, and almost 10 power 57 neutrinos they get released in fraction of time. They take away matter along with it. And when they take away matter, there are neutrons, because you had the neutron rich environment. These neutrons play the role of a key role in the formation of heavier elements. Suppose on way these neutrons meet with a stable isotope. When this stable isotope takes this neutron, it forms another isotope. Now, if the neutron density is very large, therefore, and its lifetime is long enough, therefore, before it decays, it is get captured by another neutron. Before it decays, it gets captured by another neutron and another neutron, and so on. Therefore, this is how, when the neutrons are coming out and it is meeting with the nuclei, lighter nuclei, the heavier nuclei are getting formed. Now, a time comes when a very heavy nuclei gets formed. Now, if its lifetime is smaller than the time required for the another neutron to get captured, then you will have a stable nuclei. Or if the lifetime of a radioactive nuclei is long enough, then what will happen? Another neutron will get absorbed, another neutron will get absorbed, and this will keep on happening. Therefore, this is how a heavier nuclei during a R process nucleosynthesis gets formed, because you have a rich environment of neutrons and you have rich environment of nuclei, lighter nuclei, and when they are moving away from the core of the star, because of the neutron capture, if the neutron densities are very large, this happens in massive stars, which form finally as a neutron star or a black hole, they give rise to heavier nuclei. Now, the other important concept where we have the formation of matter is through the neutron star mergers or through the black hole mergers. Almost in 2017, you heard that gravitational waves have got discovered by LIGO and Virgo observatories. Now, what are these gravitational waves? These are basically disturbances in the fabric or the curvature of space-times. These are generated by accelerated masses that propagate as wave outward from their source at the speed of light. This was first proposed by Poincaré in 1905 and later predicted by Albert Einstein in 1916 in General Theory of Relativity. What happens that if you have masses, for example, the case I am going to discuss, which were observed by LIGO and Virgo observatories, where the masses of the stars were 30 times or more than the 30 times the mass of the sun. That means they were really very, very heavy stars. Now, if you think of a rubber sheet, suppose you have got a rubber sheet and you spread it and you put 2 plastic balls on those rubber sheet. Now, what will happen? When you will put 2 light plastic balls on the rubber sheet, nothing will happen. No distortion will take place on the rubber sheet. But if you put 2 steel balls on the rubber sheet, then there will be distortion on the rubber sheet. And slowly and slowly, these 2 steel balls will start coming closer to each other and the distortion will increase. The same thing happens here also. You have 2 neutron stars, 2 black holes. They are spread over the space-time. And when they are coming closer, they are producing bent or disturbances in the curvature of space-time. And those disturbances, they propagate in space and they gives rise to gravitational wave. And this you can really see that you have 2 neutron stars orbiting each other and slowly, and this is the space-time fabric, and slowly they are coming closer to each other. They are giving rise to these waves, gravitational waves, and they are coming closer and closer, and you have more and more and more and more, and you see what happens finally. Finally, they collide, and they collide to form a single object. And in this, colossal amount of energy and colossal amount of elements get released into a space. Therefore, this is how you define, you understand gravitational waves, that you have a space-time curvature, and in this, 2 heavenly objects are coming closer and producing ripples in space-time. And finally, these 2 heavy objects, they come and they collide and they form a single object, and this single object gets formed, but at the cost where colossal amount, humongous amount, gigantic amount of energy as well as elements, they get released into space. And this is how heavier elements also come into existence. Now there is another process, that is slow process, where if the stars are less massive, then the capture of neutrons, since the neutrons are less, therefore what happens, suppose a neutron is added to this seed nuclei, a heavier nuclei is formed. But since the neutrons are less, therefore it may happen that if it is unstable, it will decay and it will finally form a stable nucleus. Or sometimes, if it has got a sufficient lifetime, then there is a chance that another neutron gets captured and you have another heavier nuclei. But this happens in low mass stars, those stars where masses are less than 10 times the masses of the sun. But in general, in heavier stars where masses are more than 10 times mass of the sun, you have the predominantly R process where neutron capture through in the seed nuclei takes place and heavier nuclei get formed. Therefore, when we look at the sky into the stars, we must attribute that they and their ancestors are responsible for our existence. We all aspire to become a star without realizing that we are made of star stuff. The carbon in our cells, the oxygen in our blood, the iron in red blood corpuscles, the calcium in our teeth, and for that matter, all the atoms in our body, all the atoms in trees, all the atoms in our planet are nothing but star dust. Moreover, these trillions of atoms in our body could be from millions of stars which have died in the past. Therefore, suppose if I talk about a single teeth and there are trillions of calcium atoms, the source of those calcium atoms can be millions of stars. Therefore, in each one of us, a mini cosmos lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sajjad Atharji. I would like to request Secretary of the Science Lecture Series, Dr. Puneet Misra ji. You must have questions from the audience side. Please ask on their behalf.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for this very informative lecture. It was really a privilege to listen to you on this very fundamental aspect, and your talk was really mesmerizing, and I'm sure all of us will appreciate the direct connection that you have pointed out that we all have with the supernovas that might have happened many millions of years ago. So with that, I think the audience is very eagerly expecting answers to their question. So I will take their question.
Let me also tell you, if they have some question, they can write me also on my Gmail address, sajathar@gmail.com, and it will be my pleasure to reply to them.
Okay, sir. So first question is from Shekhar, who is a student of our university, and he is asking that in one of the slides you have shown the mass per nucleon in that curve, where iron seems to be the most stable. So
Yes.
what is so special about iron?
What is?
What is so special about iron? He wants to know.
Yeah. See, this picture actually in all the classes are shown in the reverse direction, binding energy per nucleon versus atomic number. And if you see, this is just the mirror reflection of what has been taught to you in BSc classes or even 12th classes. What you say, that binding energy per nucleon in iron nucleus is maximum. Equivalently, what I am telling you, that don't look at in terms of binding energy per nucleon. That is a bigger concept. Look from the concept that mass per nucleon in an isotope of iron is least. That means when nucleon are getting bound, their masses are much smaller than the mass of the individual nucleons, and that difference in mass they are giving coming out in the form of energy. Just you look at from the perspective of binding energy per nucleon, that is maximum in the isotope of the iron. And that is why you say that it is very stable.
I see. Sir, there is another question from Pushpraj, who is also our student, and he wants to know that you mentioned that in sun, several reactions happen. For example, 4 protons combine to give helium nuclei. So what is the experimental signature, or how do we make sure that this is exactly what is happening inside the sun?
Yes, my dear, the important point is there are two things. People have measured directly luminosity of the sun. Okay. Now the question is, how we are sure that exactly this reaction is taking place? The answer to that is, if you recall, in 2015, Nobel Prizes were awarded to Kajita-san and McDonald of Sudbury Neutrino Observatory, Canada. So what Kajita-san was awarded Nobel Prize because of atmospheric neutrino observation, while Kajita-san was awarded Nobel Prize because of solar neutrino observation. Okay. Therefore, what was the point? They observed those number of neutrinos which was exactly predicted by a standard solar model. Therefore, there exists a standard solar model which gives everything in detail, how much reaction is taking place, what is the composition of the sun, and all that. Now, in that standard solar model, it predicts that how many neutrinos should come out per unit time from the core of the sun. And experimentally, in the Sudbury Neutrino Observatory, exactly that much of neutrinos were measured in the reaction. That reaction is called neutral current interaction. There are two types of neutrino interaction. One is known as charge current interaction and another is known as neutral current interaction. और जब वेंकटेश भाई गया पहुंचेंगे तो वो हमसे ज़्यादा इसको अच्छी तरह से explain कर सकते हैं. But basically, this is the neutral current interaction through which exactly the predicted number of neutrinos were observed by the Sudbury Observatory. And for that, McDonald was awarded Nobel Prize.
Thank you, sir. Sir, there is another question. So Kumar Avanish wants to ask that how can the diameter of the universe is greater than its age if nothing can travel faster than the light?
See, what I have done, the observational universe, what I have written. See here, when I have mentioned this, I have also explicitly mentioned the other quantities, that the diameter of the observational universe is this much, 10 power 26 meters.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, because see there, this is the observed one also. Where still the Hubble, so let me tell you, the Hubble telescope, which is taking the map of the universe, still it is not able to capture the most distant galaxies. Still it has not concluded that it has mapped the most distant galaxy that exists in the universe.
Thank you, sir. Sir, you mentioned that there is a correlation between the lifetime and mass of the star. So could you please elaborate on that and how to estimate the lifetime from a given mass?
See, the important point is when the mass of a star becomes very large, okay, then the nuclear fusion reaction that takes place inside the core, okay, that the process becomes very rapid. Okay, as I have told you, I'm sorry I have not shown that picture, but you see what happens when the mass is here is very large, then you have lots of gas to prepare your food, okay, and therefore the stove is burning very fast and it is consuming fuel very fast, and that is why the lifespan is becoming smaller and smaller. And the same is true for the heavier size stars, which I have talked about the burning of such phase, that the temperature is so high that here silicon is burning, here oxygen is burning, here carbon is burning, here helium is burning, and here hydrogen is burning. Therefore, the complete thing is involved almost in the nuclear fusion reaction, and you have the formation of heavier elements. Therefore, this type of process takes place almost in a day.
Thank you, sir. Sir, Ravi Bhushan Sharma wants to ask if, like today we use electromagnetic radiations for communication, would it ever be possible to use neutrinos?
No, no. Simply the answer is, see here, the electromagnetic interaction cross-section and the weak interaction cross-section, I have told you, they are almost 10 power 8 to 10 power 10 times a weak is smaller than the electromagnetic interaction, isn't it? And since this interaction, therefore, it is not possible to trap a neutrino. The experiments which are being performed at Fermilab, they are using a high luminosity of neutrinos, and then from the millions and billions of neutrinos, they are able to find a few interactions. Therefore, the interaction cross-section for this guy is really very small. And that is why it is almost impossible to use it even in future. Although it's very important, it plays very important role, but its importance is on the different front, rather than you say that we can use it in communication.
Thank you, sir. Sir, there is a question, like you mentioned that neutrinos are essential for the existence of heavy elements. So could you please
Yes.
elaborate on that?
See, whether I have, let me see whether I have got that slide or not. See, so first of all, look at this slide. What I am telling you, electron is getting captured by proton, and you have a neutron and a neutrino. Or electron is, the density is becoming so large that electron is getting captured by the nuclei, and you have another nuclei and a neutrino. Therefore, what you are saying, that whether it is the solar fusion reaction inside the sun, or even this process where neutrons are getting captured by the seed nuclei, but the main source of the energy transfer of supernova, which releases, I have told you, 10 power 57, I have that picture, yes, 10 power 59 neutrinos of all flavors in a few fraction of time, in which how much energy they are carrying? They are carrying almost 10 power 60 MeV of energy in a very few short interval of time. Therefore, if these neutrinos are not being formed, if these neutrinos are not playing the role of wind, I have told you, जैसे हवा बहुत तेज बहती है तो वो अपने संग में छोटे छोटे पार्टिकल्स को साथ लेके चलती है, और कभी कभी ऐसा होता है कि झुग्गी झोपड़ी और छत भी लेके उड़ जाती है। ठीक उसी तरह जो ये न्यूट्रिनो विंड है, ये इतने इनॉर्मस स्पीड के साथ और इतनी ह्यूज अमाउंट ऑफ एनर्जी के साथ चल रही है कि इसमें जो लाइट पार्टिकल्स हैं वो उसके संग ट्रेवल कर रहे हैं, और वो न्यूट्रॉन्स और लाइट न्यूक्लियाई दूसरे न्यूक्लियाई के साथ कैप्चर करके हेवियर न्यूक्लियाई फॉर्म।
Thank you, sir. Sir, one last question. Sir, one last question. You mentioned that
you can ask infinite number of questions. See, the questions are never bad, but answers are seldom boring.
Okay, thank you, sir. So you mentioned that the density of the interstellar matter is very low, 10 to the power minus 24 grams per centimeter cube, which
Yes.
is even smaller than what can be created in the lab. So is it
Yes.
an experimental value? I mean, can we measure it, or it is a theoretical estimate?
No, this has been found out. That means experimentally this has been found out, but I will have to check.
I see. Thank you,
You
sir.
know, basically I am a nuclear physicist and a particle physicist. I am a neutrino physicist, but this is a topic which has fascinated me a lot, astrophysics. Therefore, I cannot have answer of all the questions of astrophysics, because I have never written a paper in astrophysics.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Puneet ji. We heard really very interesting journey from basic to advanced, from birth to death of the star, and with full of information, a lecture on periodic table, the periodic table through the eyes of physicists, in a very popular way from of Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh, and very interacting question and answer session. I will request coordinator of our science lecture series, Dr. Vijay Rajji, please give vote of thanks. Vijay Rajji.
Good afternoon to everyone. I am honored and lucky to have opportunity to give a vote of thanks on this special day. I particularly like Professor Athar's speech, where he mentioned the chemistry periodic table through the eyes of physicists. The way in which he explained this topic was extraordinary. I would like to thank all my friends, teachers from CUSB, particularly Professor Sahi, Professor Chandra ji, Professor Lakhvinder ji, and Professor Angad Singh ji, as well as the faculty from outside of the CUSB, particularly Professor Brijesh Chaudhary ji from Delhi University, Professor Ajay Gupta ji from Mahatma Gandhi Central University, Motihari, and Professor Anirudh Kumar from KS College, Darbhanga, who always helped us and suggest us to organize such wonderful webinar. I must not forget to thank the students who always gathered in such a great number and show their interest in such webinar series. Finally, I again want to thank the head of department and the chairman of this science lecture series session to Professor Venkatesh Singh and respected my fellow colleague, fellow coordinator, Professor Pudend Singh, and Secretary, Professor Puneet Mitra ji, are participating in this seminar. I would like to thank you once again for making this event a grand success. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for tolerating
Okay,
me
so-
for so long.
Thank you. Dear participants and colleagues, that's all for now. We will see you on August 26 at 11:30 a.m. with another wonderful speaker, Professor Henry TSJ King Wang of Institute of Physics, Academia Sinica, Taipei, Taiwan. He will speak on neutrino physics. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and keep thinking. Goodbye.
Okay,
Thank you,
thank
sir.
you. Bye bye.
Thank you, Sajjad bhai. Thank you
सभी
so
को
much.
नमस्ते, बहुत अच्छा टॉक रहा, बहुत
Thank
बढ़िया।
you, thank you.
Thank you,
ये
Professor.
हमारे एमएससी के दिनों को याद दिला दिया सर पूरा।
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
थैंक यू सर, थैंक यू वेरी मच।